Hey guys, welcome back to DCS. So today I'm starting a brand new series on my channel, guys. It will be called the Red Air series. And we're going to do tutorials and we're going to fly out all the Red Air aircraft from the MiG-15 and eventually all the way to the MiG-23. Now, we're going to do the MiG-15 today in anticipation for the release of the Razbam MiG-19P, which is going to be coming out very shortly. In my opinion, if we are to fully appreciate the MiG-19, we have to understand the MiG-15. But unfortunately, we don't have the MiG-17 as well. And today, I will be doing a short historical presentation and an introduction of the MiG-15. Now, for those of you who, for some whatever reason, you're not interested in the history behind the MiG-15, you can go ahead and skip to this timestamp and get straight to the action. Now, for the remainder of us, for those of us who are interested, we'll go ahead and have a look at as I said, a brief historical presentation of the MiG-15. Now, in this series, in this Red Air series, guys, I want to do the MiG-15 first, as I said, and then we'll move on to the MiG-19, and then we'll move on to the MiG-21. After the MiG-21, obviously the MiG-23 by Razbam isn't out yet, it's a long way away. We will look at the Yak-52, as well as the L-39. And then after that, we will move on to the MiG-23 and whatever else Red Air aircraft that we get during that time period. So, let's go ahead and get started with the presentation, guys. Now, we cannot look at the MiG aircraft without looking at the MiG Design Bureau. Now, as the name suggests, this is a bureau, a design bureau. It isn't like our own Western traditional private companies building jets like your McDonnell Douglases and General Dynamics and Lockheed and so on and so forth. So these are design bureaus only. They're not private companies. They're state-owned, in a Soviet system, they're state-owned design bureaus. Now obviously this is back when the Soviet Union existed. Now it's different. So I've always wondered where the name MiG came from. Now the name MiG comes from the combination of the last name of Mikoyan and Gorevich. So it's Mikoyan I Gorevich. Now the I is a Cyrillic word or letter for the combination of Mikoyan and Gorevich. Now, Artyom Mikoyan, the chief or the head of the design bureau, was born in Armenia, and his deputy, Mikhail Gorevich, was born in Ukraine. Now, both Armenia and Ukraine were part of the Soviet Union back then. The design bureau was established in 1939, so this is just before the Second World War. Now, some of the famous aircraft that they have produced was the MiG-1, the MiG-3, the MiG-9, the MiG-15, which is what we're looking at today, the MiG-17, the MiG-19, the MiG-21, MiG-23, MiG-25 Foxbat, Mach 3 aircraft, and the MiG-29. And obviously there are a whole host of other aircraft that I haven't mentioned here. Now, Artyom Mikoyan was a highly decorated aircraft designer. He was very famous within the Soviet Union. And this isn't... his fame mostly came after the Second World War. This is not during the Second World War. But nonetheless, he was very highly regarded within the aircraft design community in the Soviet Union. Now, the name MiG is the most recognizable Soviet aircraft brand, if we can call it a brand for a lack of a better term. The name MiG became very famous, both within the Soviet Union and obviously internationally as well. Now, most people, when they saw most people who weren't very knowledgeable about aircraft, when they saw a Soviet or Russian aircraft, they would immediately call it a MiG. Regardless, maybe it was a Sukhoi, maybe it was a Tupolev, an Ilyushin, whatever. So they immediately said MiG because MiG was very famous. Now, something called the MiG diplomacy, this is a term known in international relations, MiG diplomacy started. In that the Soviet Union would supply MiG aircraft to its satellite states, or to states that were favorable to the Soviet Union, that were friends with the Soviet Union. And if those states began drifting away politically from the Soviet Union and began sort of trying to lean towards the West, they would stop supplying parts for their MiGs of those countries, and their entire aircraft, the entire Air Force fleet would be grounded. So those countries had no choice but to go back to the Soviet Union, and then the supplies and the spare parts for the MiGs would resume again. So this is the MiG diplomacy. Now MiG-15 made the Design Bureau very famous. As I said, for the part of the Second World War, the MiG Design Bureau wasn't as successful as it was in the Cold War. The MiG-15 put this Design Bureau on the map, both within the Soviet Union and internationally. MiG-15 was very, very good for the MiG Design Bureau. The MiG Design Bureau was later renamed Mikoyan, simply just Mikoyan, in the honor of Artyom Mikoyan, the lead design chief. And now the MiG, or the Mikoyan Design Bureau, is a private company after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It is no longer a state-owned design bureau. So let's move on to the era that we're moving towards jets. So we don't have jet aircraft yet, but we're moving towards the jet era. So piston engine aircraft had reached their peak potential. Now, clever aircraft designers, even before the Second World War, realized that piston or propeller-driven aircraft had a peak potential. Their potential was capped, and that's mostly in regards to speed, of how fast a propeller-driven aircraft can go. Germany and the United Kingdom were the jet engine pioneers. Now, Germany was ahead of the UK slightly, but both countries independently worked and developed their own jet engines. However, as I said, Germany was slightly ahead. Now, subsequently, the first ever jet-powered aircraft to fly was the Heinkel 178 in 1939. So that's very early on, 1939. Now, the Soviet Union conducted limited pre-war R&D into jet-powered aircraft, but was stopped due to the start of the Second World War. Now, at the end of the war, the Soviet Union and the Western Allies captured German jet engines as well as finished German jets, and that helped push their progress of their indigenous jet designs. So this is an indigenous Soviet-designed and built BI-1 liquid rocket-powered aircraft, which first flew in 1942. So this is the result, this is the product of the limited R&D that the Soviets conducted themselves before the war. And they were able to make this prototype completely indigenously, like only using their own parts. And it was codenamed BI-1. And obviously it wasn't a jet engine, but it was a rocket-powered, and it flew in 1942. It suffered from fatal dives at high speed. So at high speed, the aircraft tended to go into a dive, which led to some test pilot fatalities as well. And also the liquid fuel was too unsafe to be put into service. So, as I said, at the end of the war, the Allies as well as the Soviets captured German jet engines. Now, the Soviets captured two main types of German engines: the Junkers Umo 004 on the left and the BMW 003 on the right. Now, it is also important to mention that these German engines themselves weren't considered to be 100% complete. They were supposed to be tweaked and regularly updated. But obviously, when the Germans lost the Second World War, all work stopped on these jet engines technology. So, the Soviets reverse engineer or remake the Umo 004 into the RD-10, and the BMW 003 into the RD-20. Now, the first ever actual Soviet fighter jets flew on April 1946. They flew on the same day. On the left, we have the Yak-15 powered by the RD-10, which is the Junkers Umo 004, and the MiG-9 powered by the RD-20 on the right, which was the BMW 003. Now, one thing that you guys should know from this is that both of these two aircraft have straight wings. So they're basically a combination of their old piston propeller-driven aircraft with just a jet engine. So that's very important for you guys to know. So, and it's the same thing in the West as well. If you have a look at the F-80, the F-84, they have straight wings as well. So we move on to the Rolls-Royce Nene engine. The Soviet Union purchased 60 Rolls-Royce jet engines and also supposedly acquired license for production. Now, why do I say supposedly acquired license? Because historians here don't agree on whether the Soviet Union actually purchased a license for production. Some say they did, some say they didn't. They just outright purchased the engines and then copied them. Now, there's also a famous quote by Joseph Stalin here, and this is not a direct quote, so you guys don't quote me here. This is just sort of a paraphrase of what he said. There's a famous quote where he says, "What fool will sell us their secret military technology?" Basically, this is Joseph Stalin saying, how would we be able to buy jet engines from Britain, from Rolls-Royce, even though we're basically a competitor? So this is the end of the Second World War. This is where a part of the time where the world is heading towards the Cold War, right? So he's surprised that they're able to get their hands on Rolls-Royce jet engines. Now, as I said, the RD-10 and the RD-20, copied from their German Junkers Umo 004 and BMW 003, weren't that good. They weren't really a fighter aircraft's engine. It wasn't very good in a highly maneuverable fighter type aircraft. So, the MiG-15. Now we come to the MiG-15. So after the acquisition of the Rolls-Royce Nene engine, Soviet jet fighter development shifted into high gear. So now the Soviets had an actual high-performance, top-of-the-line engine to work with. So they developed the I-310 prototype fighter, which is the prototype for the MiG-15. And it first flew on December 30th, 1947. It had a top speed of 1,050 kilometers an hour. And with increased speed also comes increased drag. Now the MiG-15 has a wing sweep of 35 degrees. Now if you cast your memories back to the Yak-15 as well as the MiG-9, you'll remember that they had straight wings. Now if you have straight wings at high speed, when you approach Mach, the aircraft basically gets stopped in its track. You cannot accelerate any further because of the drag, because of the high amount of air drag on the wings. So they had to sweep the wings. As I said, the MiG-15 has a 35 degrees wing sweep. Now, when you sweep the wings, you also create longitudinal instability. So air is moving down the side of the wings, of the leading edge, over the wing as well. Now, without getting into a lot of aerodynamic discussions here, that basically creates stalls on the wing where air is moving down laterally and it isn't providing lift. So they had to introduce what's known as boundary layer fences or aerodynamic fences. So when we move on to the actual aircraft in DCS, you guys will see these fences on the wing. These are the aerodynamic fences. From the 1950s onwards, the MiG-15bis was developed. Now here we have the Klimov VK1 jet engine. All MiG-15bis variants were now fitted with the Soviet-produced VK1. It increased thrust to 2,700 kilograms. So this is a Klimov or Soviet-designed engine that is based on the Rolls-Royce Nene engine, but it is a little bit better. So the MiG-15bis. which is what we have in DCS now. The MiG-15bis is 10 meters long. It is 3.7 meters tall. It has a wingspan of 10 meters. Its empty weight is 3,700 kilograms. Its loaded weight is 5,000 kilograms. Its engine thrust is 6,000 pounds. Rate of climb is 51 meters per second. Service ceiling is 15,000 meters. Maximum speed is 1,070 kilometers an hour. Maximum range at the best possible conditions is 2,220 kilometers. Its armament is 2 times 23mm cannons as well as one 37mm cannon, and it can carry a total of 200 kilograms of bombs and rockets on 2 pylons. So that's 100 kilograms each on each pylon, or fuel tanks as well. Now the BIS variant also has bigger air brakes. So the air brakes were improved, they were made more efficient, and more than 15,000 variants of the MiG-15 were built, guys. That is incredible. That's probably the most mass-produced fighter jet of all time. And also an interesting fact, the MiG-15 was the first Soviet aircraft to conduct air-to-air refueling. Now that was an experimental variant of the MiG-15, not a full production, but nonetheless, that's very interesting. Now let's move on to the Korean War. So the Korean War starts in June 1950. And this is the war that makes the MiG-15 as well as the F-86 Sabre famous. So the MiG-15s were initially flown by Soviet pilots. So when the Soviet Union decides to send MiG-15s over to North Korea and China, they have to pilot the aircraft by Soviet pilots, because the Chinese and the North Koreans did not have combat-ready pilots. So the Soviets send out their own pilots, as well as they begin training North Korean and Chinese pilots. Now, the Soviet pilots had to conceal their identities, basically, so as to not show that the Soviets were involved in the Korean War, because that would have had wider international implications if the Soviets were going head-to-head with American forces in North Korea. So the Soviets had to fly under North Korean and Chinese colors on their aircraft. So basically they had to put Chinese as well as North Korean insignia on their aircraft, and they had to change their uniforms, and sometimes they had to speak in Chinese and North Korean while they were flying in the air as to not be recognized. And they were also prohibited from flying over enemy-controlled or the Western-controlled areas of the Korean Peninsula, so that if they were shut down or the aircraft stopped working, they wouldn't be captured. So the MiG-15 was easily able to overpower the Allied piston engine aircraft as well as their straight-wing jets. So the MiG-15 was very easily able to take down the B-29 bombers, the P-51 Mustangs, the F-80s, the F-84s. So all these straight-wing aircraft were no match for the MiG-15. Now the F-86 Sabre was the only Western fighter jet that could match the MiG-15 in Korea. Now the F-86 Sabre was just beginning to come off the production line, and they were rushed. Any F-86 Sabres that were ready were basically quickly rushed to the Korean Peninsula to basically stop the MiG-15. Now the F-86 Sabre was more technologically advanced than the MiG. Now what do I mean by that? The F-86 Sabre had a radar gun sight. Basically the radar, it has a little radar in its nose. You can see from this photograph as well. If you look at the just in front of the engine inlet, there's a black part that's protruding out. That is a radar mounted in the nose of the F-86 that basically gave the pilot a shooting trajectory solution for the cannons, for the 650 caliber machine guns that it had. And it also has a whole host of other technological stuff that's in the Sabre that was not in the MiG. And obviously we will have a look at the Sabre as well, and then you guys will see that the Sabre is way more technologically advanced than the MiG-15. Now, the F-86 also had better horizontal characteristics, so in a turn fight, the Sabre would turn tighter. The Sabre also had a better top speed, a higher top speed. The Sabre was also less prone to compressibility than the MiG at higher speeds. But the MiG had better vertical climb, higher service ceiling, and better acceleration than the F-86 Sabre, which led to the North Korean, Russian, Chinese pilots to basically, when they engaged with Sabres, they would just climb straight up, and the Sabres couldn't catch them. So that's the technique that they used in the Korean War. The MiG-15 also had a stronger set of armaments. Two 23mm cannons as well as a 37. The Sabre only has 6. The initial variants only had 6 50 caliber machine guns. Now, guys, we've come to the end of the presentation. For those of you who watched, thank you so much for watching. And let's move on to the MiG-15 in DCS world. Thank you. Okay, so here we are in the MiG-15bis cockpit in DCS world. We're here at the Mozdok airfield, in snowy Mozdok airfield. We will be spending most of our tutorial time, gameplay time in the MiG-15 here in the Caucasus in Russia, which is where the MiG-15 belongs. Okay, so this is going to be a quick as I can tour of the various different things in the cockpit. Basically a cockpit familiarization for the MiG-15bis. Okay, so let's start from the left. So this is the RSI 6K receiver, I believe, the radio receiver. Down here we have the oxygen regulator. We have the emergency oxygen valve. We have the oxygen dilution sort of valve. And here we have the oxygen supply valve. So down there we have the switch that basically separates the ARC5 NDB Morse code sound from the radio sound. So basically this allows you to either have in your headset to only hear the radio, or to hear the radio plus the NDB Morse code sound as well. Over here we have the air brake switch. Now this air brake switch, and it has an air brake light as well. This air brake switch is for holding the air brakes open for an extended period of time. There's also an air brake toggle switch here on the stick if you want to just momentarily deploy the air brakes and retract it quickly, but this is for the long term. And if it's on, if the air brakes are deployed, this green light will turn on. So down here we have the RSI 6K receiver tuning knob for the radio, various different channels. We'll get to that later. Here we have the signal flare switch button, so you turn this on and then you can deploy various amounts of different flares of different colors and sorts using these buttons here. This knob here is the cockpit lighting knob, and here we have the 3 pre-selected NDB switches. Over here is the air brake, pneumatic air brake pressure, how much air you have left in the brake system. Moving down here into the throttle quadrant, so we have the flap handle. We've got the various different flap controls. Down there, over here, this is the fuel shutoff valve. So basically to cut fuel or to provide fuel for the engine. Over here we have various different circuit breakers. We have the air start one, ignition, engine instruments, so on and so forth. I'll explain that when we get to the startup. Over here we have the elevated trim flap, as well as the neutral light. So when the elevator is in neutral, this white light will be on. Up here we have the NDB homing near far switch, which I'll explain later. Here we have the buttons to arm the forward 23, aft 23, and the 37 to basically arm the cannons. Right here we have the exterior navigational lights as well as the landing lights. Let me see if I've forgotten anything. No. Okay. So obviously this is the throttle. This is the throttle. Over here on top of the throttle, we have the ignition start button to start up the aircraft. On the actual throttle grip, we have this twist grip for the targeting, basically controlling the ASP gun sight pipper size, basically your target distance size. And over here we have the radio button that allows you to connect the radio and communicate, as you can see. This lever right here, this is the it says hydro booster level, but this basically controls the boosters to the aileron actuators. So if you have this in the off position, it will be difficult to roll. The aircraft will be a little bit more sluggish to roll because this provides a little bit of boost to the aileron actuators. And here we have the gauge for the amount of pressure, hydraulic pressure we have in the actuator boosters. Down here we have the aileron trim button, left, right, and we have the fire control panel. So this is the alarm light, the fire detection light. Basically will light up if there's a fire in the engine. This is the test button. This black button over here on the top is the test button for the light. And this switch here with the cover on is basically the fire extinguisher button. So if you press that, the fire extinguishers will be released. Now let's get to the center console. Down here we have the level of oxygen in the tanks available. So that tells you how much oxygen you have. This is the landing gear handle, and this is the landing gear handle lock. Retracted, neutral, down position. And here we have the landing gear light indicators. So red is up unlocked, green is down unlocked. And we have a test for the lamp, for the landing gear light lamps test button right here. This is the oxygen inhaling indicator. Basically this shows you these will open and close if you're taking in oxygen. Up here, this green light here will indicate that will light up when your flaps are down at 55 degrees. So that's the maximum flap you can have in the MiG-15. This is the landing flap light. Basically, if this is on, that means that your flaps are down all the way to 55 degrees. This is the airspeed indicator, altimeter, as well as radar. Radar altimeter basically tells you how high off the ground you are. This is the landing gear warning light. Basically, if you have your flaps down to 55 degrees but you haven't lowered your landing gear, this light will come up telling you to lower your landing gear, not to forget it. This is the marker light. So if you fly over an NDB, this will light up, and the buzzer over on this side will also give you a buzzing tone. Here we have the artificial horizon with the pull to cage button, as well as the moving the tweaking with the artificial horizon. Here we have the aviation clock, Mach meter down there. Moving along, we have the generator off light. So every time that you move your throttle below 4,500 RPM, 4,000 RPM, this light will come on. Basically suggesting that the generator is off. Here we have the vertical velocity indicator, showing you your climb and descent rate. Here we have the gun camera, the S13 gun camera light. Down here we have the 300 liters warning lamp for the fuel. So when your fuel gets to about 300 liters, this light will come on. And this is the fuel gauge, basically, your aircraft fuel gauge. This light here, the green one, is the second tank warning light. So when your second tank, fuel tank, is empty, this light will come on. Down here we have the start, basically engine start prohibition light that comes on before you start the aircraft. When this light is on, you're not allowed to turn on the engines. We'll get to that in the starting video. Now this button here is the engine air start button. So if you have this switch on this circuit breaker panel, the air start switch in the on position to start the aircraft in the air. Basically, if you have an engine stall, you can restart it, but as long as that switch is on, this light will remain on to let you know that you need to turn that off. Here we have the Arc 5 radio compass heading indicator. We have the gyromagnetic compass, and the fast slave button to basically get rid of any inaccuracies that there is in the compass. Down here we have the oil pressure, fuel pressure, and oil temperature. Basically 3 dials in one. So oil pressure, fuel pressure, as well as oil temperature. Moving on, up here we have the engine tachometer, basically showing you the RPMs of the engine. Now this inner side of the tachometer goes from 0 to 5,000 RPM. From there on, you go to 6,000, 7,000 from the outer scale. So for the first 5,000, you work your way off the inner circle. From 5,000 onwards, you go from the outer scale. Here we have the EGT, or engine exhaust temperature. Basically tells you your EGT. It's very difficult to get down there. Move your head in a way that you can see these gauges. So here we have the volt amp meter. Basically tells you the amount of amps you're drawing, and if you press this button here, it tells you in the orange scale the amount of volts that there is. So by pressing that, it goes to volts. Naturally, it's on amps. Here we have the clock and pitot heat heater button. So basically to heat the pitot static tube over here in case it freezes up. So that's the heater button for that, as well as the clock. Over here we have the cabin altitude gauge. Basically tells you what altitude your cockpit is, your cabin is. It tells you the pressure differences between the cockpit and the outside. Here we have another fuel pressure indicator, but this one is a little bit more sensitive than this top row right here. As you can see, this goes from all the way up to 100 kilograms per square centimeter. This only goes up to 10. Moving on down here to this side, to this center weapons control panel. So this is everything to do with your weapons control panel. This light here indicates that there are that your drop tanks are empty. This green light comes on when your drop tanks are empty, but this will only light on as long as you have this switch in the on position. So it says drop tank signalization. So if you have this in the off, this light won't work. If you have this on and you have drop tanks and it's empty, it will light on. So these are your weapons arming lights, the forward 23, aft 23, and the 37. These lights will turn on if and when the guns are armed using these buttons here. This is the emergency bomb/fuel tank release button. So you can release your bombs and your wing tanks in case of an emergency. Here we have the tactical release switch for the bombs. Basically, when you have this on, the bomb fuses will get armed and they will detonate upon impacting. So this is the basically a bomb arming switch. And here, if you have bombs and you have this switch on, it will say armed. This light here will light up. And these two green lamps here will indicate if there's any load on any of the two pylons, left for left pylon, right for right pylon, fuel tanks or bombs, rockets, whatever you have. If there's anything on the pylons, these lights will turn on. And subsequently, when you drop them, they will turn off. And down the bottom we have our two rudder pedals, as you can see, right rudder, left rudder, and you can see the mechanical actuators as well. And in the middle we have the stick, we have the flight stick. Now this flap here is your brake flap. Basically this is what you use to use it for wheel brake basically in the aircraft. In the Western type aircraft we have our pedals in the rudder, on the rudder pedals we have like an actual car brake, but this you'll only use this sort of bike brake type lever here. And then if you want to turn, you will turn using differential braking. So if I want to turn to the left, I'll hold the brakes down and I'll go left rudder, and basically they'll use differential braking to turn the aircraft. Up here we have a sort of a safety switch for the guns, a secondary method of providing safety for the guns. So you push this flap open, and then it will become your trigger for the 23s, and you have a button up here for your 37mm cannon as well. But you need to have this red flap opened, so it works as a trigger and as a safety mechanism. Over here, as I explained before, this is the aircraft air brake toggle switch on the stick. So if you want to temporarily just deploy your air brakes, and then once you release, the air brakes will close. Down here it's a bit difficult to see. This button down there, the pinky button, this is the weapons release button. So this is what you would use to drop bombs or to deploy rockets. That's that for the stick. Now these two red levers here, so this one is for the emergency deployment of the left landing gear. Obviously this plane has three landing gears. It has a nose gear and a left and right. So this is for the left landing gear, and this one is for the center, the nose landing gear, as well as the right landing gear. Now let's move on to this right side panel. So here we have the emergency landing gear valve. So if your landing gear doesn't work after you've pulled these two levers, you'll go ahead and open this valve, and it will basically, using pneumatic pressure, it will drop the landing gear down. Now here we have the landing gear emergency pressure gauge, telling you how much emergency pressure, air pressure you have for dropping the landing gear in kilograms per centimeter square. This is your total hydraulic utility hydraulic pressure gauge for the aircraft. And here again we have the emergency flap deployment valve. Again, same with the landing gear. It's pneumatic, so basically air is used to drop the flaps in case of an emergency. And again, we have the gauge for the amount of air that you have for releasing the flaps in an emergency. And this gauge here basically shows you the total amount of air, compressed air, that you have on board the aircraft. Getting over here, we have another whole bunch of circuit breakers, battery generator, landing light, trimmer, so on and so forth. We get to those, we'll look at those in detail once we get to the aircraft startup. Here we have the ARC-5 and the radio station, basically module where we use the ARC-5. We'll get to that in navigation. Here we have the UV lamp control. So basically these two things are UV lamps, and these gauges with the arrows, they have UV reflectant tips. If you turn it on, it's at night, it gives you a nice cool look on the gauges. What else? This handle right here is the emergency canopy jettison handle. So if the canopy is closed and you pull this, the canopy will eject. Basically, it will get thrown out. Here we have the cockpit pressurization knob. Basically, you can pressurize the cockpit. We'll get to that later. This is your map holder. So this is the buzzer for the NDB if you fly over a beacon. This is not implemented in the game. This is the oxygen mask holder, which is not in the game. I don't think I'm missing anything else. Okay, now we move back here. This is the RS. I think it is the RSI 6K. Yeah, RSI 6K transmitter. So over here, the first thing that we looked at was the receiver. And this is the transmitter. And obviously, I will explain that once we get to the radio section. And it's very, very, very primitive and very difficult to use, guys. So you got a whole bunch of controls here, but nonetheless, it's quite rewarding. So this is the transmitter, and we have the receiver. And over here, this handle opens the canopy. This one closes it. So as you can see, canopy closed, canopy open. And there we go. That's about it. Just up here, we have the standby compass, normal magnetic compass, and we have the gun sight here. Here you can dial in the wingspan of any aircraft that you want to attack, and we have the gyro/fix lever here. So if it's in gyro, the gun pipper will move around. Obviously, if it's in fixed, it won't move around. Here we have the brightness control for the gun sight, and then we have another ventilation related thing here. But obviously, this, in the game, it's not that important. Now, guys, I'm sorry if I've missed anything, but I don't think I've missed anything. Thank you so much for watching. I know this video is getting way too long. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.